Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate the turnout. Had to pull some extra chairs out of the back. If you do see people who are looking for a seat and you have one empty next to you, just kind of move over so people can find the aisles and find a seat. My name is Dave Cochran. I work here at Loras College. I'm also on the planning committee for the International Day of Peace. This is our 8th year sponsoring a series of events throughout the Dubuque community celebrating the United Nations International Day of Peace, which falls on September 21st each year. And each year we have a keynote address here at Loras, and that's what we're having tonight, so I appreciate you coming to it. We have a fantastic speaker today. Hopefully he's not too tired because we've had him running in classes at Loras, at Clark, all over. He's been fantastic and very giving of his time and his wisdom. To introduce him, however, I'm going to have Evelyn come up. She's the president of our planning and steering committee, and she will tell you about our speaker. So thanks.
Thank you, and good evening. Before I make introductions, I want to show some gratitude. I want to thank Dave Cochran, who has, the years we've been here and for this main event at Loras, he has made things so easy. He has really smoothed the way and been a wonderful host. So I want to acknowledge all his work for him. I also want to thank the other committee members. Could you stand up, members of our coordinating committee who are here? We work all year to make a successful festival, and their work is very appreciated. I also want to acknowledge and thank our sponsors, and you can see a list of them on the brochure that you may have, as well as online. And I especially want to thank the Archbishop Kucera Center at Loras College for their continuing support of our festival. We also thank partners and the organizations that join with us to hold events as part of the festival. And as you probably know, there are many more events coming up after tonight, from our organizations and some that the committee itself is involved with, until we end on Saturday, September 30th, with our hike for refugees and barbecue in DBQ. So that's on Saturday, September 30th. I do want to make one correction or change to our brochure. After it was published, we did have a change. So where it says immigration simulation for September 25th, that is actually September 26th. September 26th, same time, and it will be at Stoll's Gym at UD. So just that little change. That is on the website, the correct information, so if you want to find that again. The UN Day of Peace is recognized around the world, and it has been since the 80s. We have been having our celebration since not that long. This is our 8th year, as Dave mentioned. And in that time, we have really looked at peace from a number of different angles, from the power of words, nonviolent conflict resolution, environment, faith and divisions amongst faiths. And so, we tried to really come at peace from a number of different perspectives. We already have our theme for next year, and I'll share that with you now, which is looking at Armistice Day. Next year will be the 100th anniversary, the centennial of Armistice Day, which was to celebrate peace at the end of World War I, which was supposed to be the war to end all wars. And we all know that war doesn't end war. And so we're going to look at that. And we invite all of you to join the committee to help plan what that festival will look like. We meet once a month. And if you're interested, you can see me afterward or any of those committee members who stood up. So last year, as we thought about what will our theme be this year, we talked about a number of ideas. But one seemed more urgent than the others, and that was this theme of who is an American, who decides, who defines, that kind of thing. And I'm sad to say that it's probably even more relevant now than it was then. You know, we've had a year from Standing Rock to Charlottesville, from the attempt to build walls to deport young people who belong here just as much as anyone else. There has been an effort to redefine, to exclude, to create a definition that is not inclusive. And so it's something that we all need to be talking about. So I appreciate that you're all here tonight. And I especially appreciate that Jim Bear Jacobs is here with us to help us talk about this tonight. When we first started to talk about a speaker, many in our committee had seen and heard Jim Bear Jacobs speak last year when he was at Sinsinawa Mound for Native Voices, Spirit, Place, Healing, and Justice, and were very taken by what he had to say and felt that he would really be a good person to speak to us tonight. Some of you may also have been at Sinsinawa Mound last year and heard him, but for those of you who have not heard him before, let me tell you a little bit about him. Jim Bear Jacobs was born in 1977 in St. Paul, Minnesota. He is a member of the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican Nation, an American Indian tribe located in central Wisconsin. He has degrees in pastoral studies and Christian theology and has served various churches as youth minister, adult Christian educator, and director of men's ministries. He currently serves as an associate pastor of Church of All Nations, and he is a cultural facilitator in the Twin Cities and works to raise the public's awareness of American Indian causes and injustices. He is a convener of Healing Minnesota Stories, a committee dedicated to creating events of dialogue and education, particularly within faith communities. He presently lives in Mounds View, Minnesota, with his wife and 4 young children, and we are very, very happy to have him join us, and I ask you to help me welcome him.
Smile. I'm working on my social media game, so. I'm road tripping with my oldest daughter. Came down here, what day is it today? Came down here Wednesday. Is it Thursday today? So we came down here yesterday. I didn't know what to expect. It's a little overwhelming. We're at capacity, if not more, for this room. And my daughter asked a poignant question. Do all of these people go to this school? So if you go to this school, will you raise your hand just so she knows? Okay. So maybe a little more than half of you. She asked another important question, like, the rest of you don't go to this school, you're not required to be here, you have nothing better to do than come hear me speak. All right. Is the mic positioned okay for everyone in the room? I just want to take some sort of housekeeping logistics first and foremost. So in the back, we're good? Thumbs up? Awesome. Ahu kula mausi. Ni de jinji makwa. Jim Bear Jacobs. Ni tak de langamau. Ni mahikanu. Na kakosato wa kula mausi. I give you greetings. This evening, I introduce myself as Bear, or Jim Bear Jacobs. I also introduce myself as a member of the Turtle Clan of the Mohican Nation. And with goodness in my heart, I extend my welcome and my gratitude to all assembled today. Among the work I do in the Twin Cities is ensuring that the Native and Indigenous voices are brought into arenas and settings that they have been willfully or unwillfully ignored in many settings. I prioritize the indigenous stories of where I am. In my bio that was read to introduce me, you heard that my community, the Mohican people, are presently located in central Wisconsin. That is 1,100 miles from our ancestral homeland. We find ourselves 1,100 miles away from home due to 19th century government relocation policies that were enacted, passed, and carried out. That being said, I am a firm believer that if you are not at home present in the place that holds your origin stories and your sacred songs, you at least owe it to the people where you live currently to know those stories, to listen to those songs, to hear those voices. Now, where I live in the Twin Cities, it is Dakota territory. Dakota are the indigenous people of the state of Minnesota. We have 4 Dakota communities in Minnesota. We have a very small Dakota population, and again, that is because of 19th century government policies. But if we tally all of the members of these 4 Dakota communities, if we tally them all, gather them all together, we might get 1,000 people. Very small population. Still, even though they are small in number, I firmly believe that I, as a person living in the Twin Cities, owe it to the Dakota people to know their story, to know their history, to learn what little I can of their language, and to know their songs. But that just doesn't apply to me in the state of Minnesota. That is wherever I go and wherever I am. I encourage people, get to know the stories of the people whose footprints you walk in. Understanding here in Dubuque, I am in Meskwaki territory. I apologize to my Meskwaki relatives that I would presume to speak in front of you while standing with my feet firmly planted in your territory. I apologize to my Meskwaki relatives who may be present that I don't know enough of the language to greet you in the way that you deserve and to bestow upon you the honor that is due you, and for that I am sorry. I apologize to my Meskwaki relatives that I don't know any Meskwaki songs, so that I may open in a prayerful way. The best I can do is offer a prayer in the language of where I currently reside, where I live, the Dakota language. And again, with apologies to my Meskwaki relatives, I am sorry that I don't know enough to offer this song in Meskwaki. But I want to begin this evening by opening in a prayerful way, so we begin our conversation tonight in a good way. So I would ask, if you're able, please stand. Gentlemen in the room, if you're wearing a hat, it is protocol that you would remove it. And I apologize for the condition of my voice. I've been speaking all day today, but we'll give it our best go. Tonka Shela Pidamaya ye Pidamaya ye Pidamaya ye do he We chose Ania Maya Kujo Pidamaya ye do he Tunka Shela Pidamaya ye Pidamaya ye Pidamaya ye do he We chose Ania Maya kuja pida maya yedohe. Oh. Wakantanka tunkshela unchimalaya. Chi inamaka. Unchimalaya tunkshela. Oh, mitakoyasan. Thank you. Please be seated. So let's get started, shall we? When I was contacted by the committee, what is the committee's name? The committee for, sure, a coordinating committee. It's got a better title than that, but when I was contacted by the committee, I can't even remember how many months ago the initial contact was made, but then the question was asked, we'd like you to speak on who is an American, and I thought, sure, I can do that, right? Well, this is last year before the election. This is last year before 2017 politics, right? And as Evelyn said, yeah, there just seems to be like an urgency in this conversation we're having now. And I must confess, some intimidation. Like looking across the room, seeing all these students, elders, men, women, seeing everyone assembled here, I have to admit, I have to fully confess, I am wholly and totally unqualified to answer this question, who is an American? And part of the reason is I struggle to wonder, can anyone answer that question, who is an American? Sociologists have tried. In 2008, there was a sociological experiment in which average citizens, citizens of the United States, were shown a series of pictures, and they were asked to gauge the Americanness of each picture that they saw. And when it's perhaps not surprising for those of us who are students of sociology and students of history that when the photos of individuals the identities of the persons in those photos were anonymous. They weren't famous people. That when they were anonymous, society as an overall viewpoint tended to believe that those with white, light skin were more American than those with brown, darker skin. Like, I'm sure that doesn't come as a surprise, right? But what does come as a surprise is when they took the anonymity away from the identities that they were showing. When they showed pictures of famous people, celebrities, athletes, and that those with dark skin were known to be American citizens, and those with light skin were known to be citizens of some foreign country, still, in their findings, they found that those with light skin were rated as more American than those with dark skin, even knowing that those with light skin were not American. It got so bad that they showed a picture of then sitting President Barack Obama and then sitting British Prime Minister Tony Blair side by side. They said, this is the President of the United States, this is the Prime Minister of England. And Tony Blair was more American than Barack Obama. How do we get there? Like, how do we... Like, is anyone else just kind of in the room feeling like, okay, we have some work to do? When the British Prime Minister is more American than the United States President, something's wrong. Well, it should come as no surprise if we know a little bit about history. In 1790, Congress passed the Naturalization Act, which defined the parameters for naturalized citizenship in the United States. Basically, a first attempt to define who is an American. This limited citizenship to those quote, free white persons of good character, unquote. So our very first attempt as a nation to codify and solidify who is a citizen is limited to free white persons of good character. Now, they were being very generous in their language there, because really it should have been stated free white males of good character. Because let's be realistic, women, you didn't have a shot in the 1790s, realistically. Free white persons of good character. Later, that was opened up to include free black people of good character. But that was much later. The foundation had already been set. And in reality, the foundation goes much deeper, begins much earlier. The founding document that we all hold dear as citizens of this country is the Declaration of Independence. It's a unifying, sacred document that we can rally around. We the people. What an inclusive line. What a poetic open. We the people. But are we all included? Well, I can tell you that in the 31st line of the Declaration of Independence, my ancestors are referenced. They are referenced as merciless Indian savages. Merciless Indian savages. Written, signed, archived, stored. You can go to Washington, D.C. You can visit this document. Line 31, merciless Indian savages. So clearly, when it comes to who is an American, we're not including the people who were here. We're not. Our own Constitution deems that those with black skin descended from Africans, whether free or enslaved, are only counted as 3/5 of a person. 3/5 of a person. And only counting them so that your master could vote on your behalf. So however many slaves the master had, the master could vote on their behalf X number of times. If you were a white landowner, this was a great political system. It would constantly perpetuate itself. So within our founding documents, Native people are not citizens. Black people, whether free or enslaved, are not citizens. Women didn't enjoy the office of vote, couldn't vote until the early 20th century. So they weren't included in who is an American. Subsequent addendums to the Citizen Naturalization Act and the other acts of immigration. We saw the Chinese Exclusion Act. We saw the Greater Asian Exclusion Act, limiting the number of people who could come from China first and later wider Asia, and then restricting citizenship when they reached these shores. We saw different acts and amendments to these bills that would greatly restrict the people even from the less desirable European nations, those in the Eastern Europe nations. So we have a system that at its foundation, at its core, sets up the identity of who is an American as a white man. Excludes just about everyone else. And this carries on in an evidence of a 2008-2009 sociological experiment. it led to some ridiculous things. Are you guys aware that throughout the late 19th century and even into the early 20th century, there were people of color in our country who were appealing to the Supreme Court, people of color, saying, I am white. I am white. They attempted to litigate their way into whiteness. The first case was by a Japanese man who was trying to litigate his way into whiteness so that he could have the right of citizenship in this country. He was denied. They said, we deny because we define whiteness by the scientific definition in the anthropological categories. There are 3 categories. You have the Mongoloid, the Negroid, and the Caucasianoid. The Caucasianoid make up white people. So, he was denied his entrance into whiteness and thus denied his citizenship. A subsequent case after that was by a man of East Indian descent who, fortunately for him, actually came directly out of the Caucasoid Mountains, of which we get the term Caucasian. If anyone has a case, it is this guy. He goes, he appeals to the court, he makes his way up, and he is told, yeah, okay, so you do come from the Caucasianoid area. You can trace your lineage back through generations through the Caucasianoid area, the Caucasus Mountains. Yeah, but you're just not white. Like, look at you. Right? What is it? The Supreme Court ruled pornography. I know it when I see it. It's like whiteness. I know it when I see it, and you're not it. So, access denied. But how ridiculous that we have a system where people are actually litigating to try and throw off their racial identity, adopt a new racial identity, so that they could have access to the citizenship. Theodore Roosevelt in 1907 was addressing this very question, who is an American? And he said, paraphrasing now, but the speech is available in text, you can find it, that an American is anyone who comes to this country and willingly gives up all identity of their native homeland and wholly buys into our American system. He doesn't define what the American system is, but our American system. He then goes on to get a little more specific and very concretely says there is no space for hyphenated American identities in our country. So African American, no space. Hispanic American, Mexican American, no space. Korean American, Chinese American, no space. Native American, no space. Historians, scholars throughout the years have tried to answer this very question. W.E.B. Du Bois in 1897 was faced with this question, was wrestling with it. Is there space for him to find a national identity in America? And in a speech he gives in 1897, he specifically asked the question, am I an American or am I a Negro? Society answered the question for him. He was a Negro. He would continue to be a Negro. Finding no space for an identity here in this country, W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the greatest minds ever to come out of our soil, actually fled to Ghana, spent the rest of his life in West Africa. Because there's no space here for his identity. He couldn't be an American. I had the pleasure and honor of speaking at, still can't say it, Sinsinawa Mound last year. We were trying to figure out when was that last year? October. So it was pre-election, but in the heat of the campaign. You ever really want to snapshot into answering this question of who is an American? Take a drive across the American heartland during an election, during campaign. Because your neighbors will do their darndest to identify who's an American for you or not. And I saw it all coming across the country. What my beliefs should be on abortion, what my beliefs should be on gay rights, what my beliefs should be on immigration, what my beliefs should be on a wall. Right? It's my own damn country, and they're telling me I should build a wall. But I wonder if we're going out about it wrong. We can't go, as Americans, we can't go back and appeal to our founding documents because they are inherently racist. They are inherently exclusionary. They leave people out intentionally. So we can't go back to our founding documents. So where do we go? You know what's missing from this conversation about who is an American, who's not an American, about who belongs, who doesn't? You know what's missing in all of these conversations about undocumented workers and should they be allowed to stay? What's missing in all these conversations about border security, building a wall, don't build a wall, beef up border security? You know what's missing? No one asked the people that were here first. No one. And until you come and you sit by a fire at the feet of a storytelling grandmother or a wise old grandpa, until you're willing to do that, politicians, your conversation on immigration policy lacks all integrity. Because all it is now is illegal immigrants who have been here longer than other illegal immigrants trying to say who can stay and who can't. It's plain and simple. My daughter asked how you have time to take a drink when you're giving a speech, and I said, you build it in. See, you build in applause points. So maybe we appeal not to the foundations of our country, but to the foundations of our land. Maybe we appeal to the storytellers whose footsteps we walk in every day and don't even know it. You see, for Native Americans, if you spend any time around Native people, you will probably hear this term Turtle Island. You may not know what it means, but Turtle Island is simply what we as Native people refer to as the North American continent. It's steeped in story. It is a land that is defined not by political borders, but by the power of story. And there are many versions of how Turtle Island gets its name. The version that I want to share with you this evening is one that has come to me through a number of storytellers, ranging from my own Mohican people, Ojibwe people, and some Cree people. It's the story of Grandmother Turtle. You see, in the beginning, the earth was filled with water. And there was no land for which any creature to stand upon. And all the creatures that existed had to exist either swimming in the water or floating on the surface of the water or flying in the air above. Now, many of the creatures are suited well for that, but some are not. Some of the four-leggeds and some of the two-leggeds grew very tired because they could only float on the surface of the water. And they appealed to Creator, they begged Creator, our legs are so tired, we need some rest. And Creator then told the assembled people, the creatures, at the bottom of water is clay. And if you can dive down and retrieve that clay, I can use that and I can spread out and I could make land. And you could sit upon the land and you could rest your legs. So they held council. They gathered all the creatures. And the first one to announce that he was going to dive to the bottom of the land was Duck. The duck was a good diver. He could hold his breath underwater for a long time. And Duck said, I will go down. I'll reach the bottom of the water and I'll bring back the clay so we can rest our legs. So Duck grabbed his breath, dove under the water, and Duck was gone a long time. He was gone the entire day. And he came back up, totally out of breath. And he said, I could not reach the bottom of the water. It's not down there. The water goes on forever. And Grandmother Turtle, she had been watching, listening. She said, I will go down to the bottom and I'll get the clay. Grandmother Turtle, you're too old. This is not a task for old women. This is a task for young men. You stay there, Grandmother Turtle. We'll take care of this. Duck couldn't do it. But next came Otter. Otter was a better diver than Duck. He could hold his breath longer. Otter said, I'm going to get to the bottom of the water and I'll bring back the land, the clay. So Otter grabs his breath, dives under the water. He's gone a long time. He's gone all the rest of that night, most of the next day. Finally, he pops back up to the surface, out of breath. The water has no bottom. There's nothing down there. Grandmother Turtle responds, I can reach it. I can go. Grandmother Turtle, be quiet. You're too old. Beaver comes along. Beaver's the best diver of them all. Beaver says, I'm going to reach the bottom. I'll get there. So he slaps his tail on the surface of the water, grabs his breath, dives underwater. He's gone the rest of that day. He's gone the entirety of the next day. Most of the third day. Pops back up to the surface, completely out of breath, totally exhausted. I could not find the bottom of the water. It's not there. We're doomed. Dejected, depressed. They hold council again, and they notice that little annoyance, Grandmother Turtle. She wasn't there. She was nowhere to be found. They scanned the entirety of the horizon all around. They couldn't find her. That old woman. How could she do that? She went to the bottom. She dove under. She can't reach it. They circle up. They watch the horizon in all directions. They wait for the rest of that day. The whole second day. The third day passes. She can't find her anywhere. They're really worried. Finally, on the fourth day, on the horizon, Grandmother Turtle floats to the surface, lifeless, breathless. They rush over to her. They grab her, try to breathe life back into her. And Grandmother Turtle, with her last breath, opens up her hand to reveal she had reached the bottom of the water. She came back with a handful of clay. Creator, true to his word, to honor that, took that clay and he molded it and he shaped it. He created. And needing a place to put this new clay, he laid it on the back of Grandmother Turtle. And so we refer to Grandmother Turtle, Turtle Island. And if I can ask you to remove that piece of paper off of that projector right there. It doesn't take much imagination to see the North American continent as looking something like this. Turtle Island. A land defined not by political borders, but a land defined by story. As an aside, I told that story one time and showed this picture in a setting, and there was a very young, too academic for his own good student. And he said, well, how did they know that? Like, how did they know the North American continent looked like a turtle? And I said, some things are just spiritual wisdom. And he said, yeah, I get that, but like, how did they know? And I said, then don't say you get it, because you don't. Some things come through spiritual wisdom. Maybe it's time that we don't care as much about our identity or our citizenship into a land defined by political borders. Maybe it's time to find our identity as people of a land defined by story, people of a land defined by song. Several years ago, I led a group from my church out to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And I know when you hear about a church group going to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, or going to any reservation for that matter, when you hear about a group coming from a church going to an Indian reservation, you're thinking missions trip. I promise you, this was nothing like a missions trip. I made sure of it. So in my intro, you heard I'm a pastor. I forbid my congregation from doing short-term missions trips to Indian reservations. I have my own reasons for that, but that's a different discussion. But just so you know, I'm just letting you know, it's not a missions trip, okay? In fact, I told my congregation, I said, if I hear you trying to spread the gospel, not that my congregation would be all this evangelical, I said, if I hear you trying to spread the gospel, I will sit you in the van for the rest of the trip. I said, the only people on this trip who are getting saved is the people who are driving out there with me. So, there I am. Myself, a very good friend of mine who is from the Rosebud Reservation, very nearby the Pine Ridge Reservation, Lakota man. And 17 other people, predominantly white people, a couple of Koreans thrown in just to flavor the seasoning, but predominantly white people. 2 natives, 17 people, predominantly white. And we were there. We were there just to spend time. Spend time in a land that holds stories of historical trauma. Spend time in a space to find out, get a feel for our complicity in this narrative of, as Christians, of dominance and oppression and subjugation of people. And so we spent a good deal of time out there in Pine Ridge, just listening to people of the Oglala Nation, meeting key leaders, meeting common folks, playing with kids. We didn't paint a fence. We didn't put up a building. We weren't there. We were there just to be. And one day we got an invitation to go and sit with a significant leader of the Oglala people, a man named Mike. Mike Hermany Horses was his name. And he invited us out to his house. Now, his house wasn't large enough to fit all of us, so he said, just fill up one vehicle and come. Maybe like your leaders, your key leaders of the team. And so we agreed that about 8 or 9 of us would go, and the rest would stay back. So myself, 7 or 8 other people, we went. First of all, if you ever tried to navigate a reservation in South Dakota, good luck. Okay? There are no street addresses. There's not mailboxes. No one puts their name out on a fence post. We got directions like drive north and turn at the water tower. Now, water tower in South Dakota is a subjective term, okay? So I don't want you to think like water towers like we're used to kind of here in the heartland. No, this was like a little fountain that sprang up so cattle could drink by the side of the road. But we found it. We found his driveway. We pull into his driveway. His driveway, you cannot see his house from the road. And that's significant because this is prairie, and you can see for miles. So when you can't see his house from the road, he is in. We call it deep in. He is deep in. But we get there, finally, after driving up his tremendously long driveway. He greets us. Hey, good to see you. Come around the back. We'll sit on the deck. Okay? So we go around to the back. We climb up the steps of his deck. And I want you to picture that Mike's backyard, the view from his back deck, from horizon to horizon, is nothing but untouched prairie. Absolutely pristine. From horizon to horizon, you can see for miles. He sits up on a hill. You can see for miles. You can't see a road. You can't see a house. You can't see a power line. Untouched prairie. His backyard came straight out of Dances with Wolves. And for you students, that is a dated reference. I get that. But you're talking to an Indian. We don't have contemporary movies to reference, so look it up, okay? Dances with Wolves. But it is untouched prairie. It's gorgeous. And we're sitting there. We sit in a circle on his deck and we have a conversation. I don't even recall what we're talking about, but I recall vividly the setting. I'm sitting here, Mike is sitting here, we are the only 2 natives in this group. Surrounding us are 8 or 9 other people who are non-native. We're having a conversation. Mike is in the middle of saying something. He stops himself in the middle of his sentence, and he looks out across the prairie in this direction. And I look out across the prairie in this direction, and nobody else on the deck looked out in the prairie across this direction. And he says, "Did you hear that?" And he went around the circle. "No." "You didn't hear that?" "No." "No." "Hear what?" "I didn't hear anything." He gets to me. "Did you hear that?" "I heard that." "What'd you hear?" I said, "Indians, we point with our lips, so." I said, "There's a song over there." He said, "Yeah, there's a song, isn't there?" "Yeah." "What do you hear?" "I hear a traditional song. I hear the drum. I hear singers." Now get this, okay? Like, I'm not one to dismiss spiritual experiences, but I know the difference between like spiritually hearing something where you feel a warmth and like actually hearing something, right? Smart enough to figure out when I'm actually hearing something. I actually heard a song. With my physical body, I heard the song. It carried on for 15, 20 seconds, and it faded into the wind. And he says, Mike says to me, "You heard it?" "Yeah." And he looks in the prairie in the direction of the song, and he says, "I don't have a neighbor in that direction for like 7 miles. There's nothing over there." Huh. That's kind of neat. Go back to a conversation. We're having a conversation again, not knowing at all what we're talking about. But I know that maybe 10, maybe 15 minutes later, we're having this conversation. We're continuing in our talking circle. And this time, I'm in the middle of sharing something, and I stop in the middle of my sentence, and I look off in the prairie in this direction. And Mike looks off to the prairie in this direction. Nobody else looks off to the prairie in this direction. "Did you hear that?" "No." "No." "Hear what?" "I heard nothing." He gets to me. Did you hear that? Yeah. What'd you hear? There's a song over there. Yeah. There's a song in it. Yep. You hear it. Hear it. Drums. Singers. Went for 15, 20 seconds. Faded into the wind. And again, Mike looks off in that direction and he says, honestly, there's nothing over there. Nothing. Huh. You see, this land, this grandmother turtle, she carries songs. She carries stories. She holds these stories, and every once in a while, we get, as people of the land, we get the benefit, we get the privilege of hearing that story or experiencing that song. Now, that is a neat story, and I love the fact that there were 2 natives on that deck. And only 2 natives heard this song, and we heard it with our physical ears, and no one else on that deck could hear that song. And I love that, right? It makes me feel special. Like, I'm sorry you missed out, but some things are just for us. But here's the thing. Grandmother Turtle is generous with her songs and her stories. As part of the work I do in the Twin Cities, I mentioned I am sitting in the heart of Dakota country with almost no Dakota around. And because I felt that it was incumbent upon the people who lived in the Twin Cities, who lived in the southern half of Minnesota, to know these Dakota stories, I sought permission from Dakota elders and spiritual leaders if I might bring people to some of these sacred sites and tell them these stories. I've been doing this for 5 years now. One of the sites I bring folks to is an area called Bedote. It is right outside of St. Paul, Minnesota. If you ever fly into the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport, you fly over Bedote. Bedote is simply a Dakota word. It means a place where 2 bodies of water come together. And this Bedote receives its name as the Minnesota River flows into the Mississippi River. This Bedote is significant. It is sacred because this is the center of the universe for the Dakota people. This is the place of first creation. The very first footsteps ever laid into Mother Earth were put in the valley at Bedote. The very first light to ever enter human ears for the Dakota people was filtered through the trees in Bedote. The very first sound to ever enter human ears was the sound of the birds and the bugs and the wind blowing through the leaves and the tall grasses at Bedote. Do you get the picture? This is the Garden of Eden, folks. It is the place of first creation. It is a valley. I have gone into this valley literally hundreds, if not more than 1,000 times in the last 5 years. Every time I go in the valley, I feel that song of creation. I feel that energy, that life, that Genesis. And I get people down there and I tell them the stories, the story that the earth herself holds. And at the conclusion of my telling the story, I always do the same thing. Everyone in the circle gets a little bit of tobacco. It is a native way of entering sacred spaces in a prayerful manner. I give them all a little hand of tobacco, and I say, go sit in Bedote. Sit in Bedote and listen, because you'll hear it. You'll hear it. When I started doing these tours 5 years ago, I said that for the first time because I thought that's what a stoic Indian would say when he's addressing Native people. I never actually thought that it would work. The first time I had a white person come out of those woods at Bedote and tell me I heard it, I damn near lost my mind. because I didn't think white people could hear it. I didn't think the song was for them. I didn't think Grandmother Turtle would be that generous. My favorite time, this is just an aside, my favorite time, I had a group from a rather conservative fundamentalist Baptist college in the area. Present in this group was the son of a more than rather conservative Baptist preacher in the area, a preacher I was familiar with, a preacher that he and I had our theological differences. Now his son's on my tour. I tell the story. I give him tobacco. I send him out. I say, listen. He comes back. 15 minutes later. First one to come back from the group. I'm sitting there. He comes up, visibly shaken, tears just ready to pour out of his eyes. He looks at me. He looks at me sternly, and he says, I don't have visions. And I want to say, that is fine. But I say nothing. And he repeats, I don't have visions. I say, okay. This is what I saw when I sat in the heart of Bidote. And he proceeds to tell me this vision that visited him while he was there. And I won't share it because it's his. But it was beautiful. I was a teensy bit jealous. But it was deep, spiritual. It was like everything that vision that Indians go out on the hill to seek, right? And it just came to him. And I'm watching him react to his own telling of the story as he has no framework to allow for this type of experience. Nothing in his spiritual upbringing says that this is an acceptable and right way for creation and creator to communicate with the created. And he tells me, after about 3 or 4 minutes, of this entirety of this vision that he had. And now the tears are coming. And he turns around, and as he's walking away, I hear him mumble to himself, I don't have visions. I don't have visions. Y'all, that day I broke a Baptist. I mean, I broke him, right? Like, I just broke him. But here's what I've discovered over the years. These songs that I thought were mine, these stories that I thought belonged to me, they do. They do. But I'm not the holder of those songs. I'm not the keeper of those stories. Bidote is. The earth. Grandmother Turtle. She's the keeper of these stories. She's the holder of these songs. I've had Somali immigrants down at Bidote. They hear things. I've had undocumented people down there. They hear things. They hear the song. It happens with such frequency that when I hear about it, it almost is like expected, right? I mean, I still get a little bit excited, but it has happened. You understand, in the last 5 years, I've had nearly 5,000 people down to Bidote. I have heard about the songs or what people hear so many times. I have heard about the visions that people have so many times that it doesn't surprise me anymore. And I discovered something that I think is perhaps beneficial when we're trying to answer this question, who is an American? Grandmother Turtle doesn't discriminate. She doesn't discriminate. Sometimes there are songs that only us Native people can hear, but I am not so arrogant to think that there aren't songs out there that I can't hear. That I have to sit with a Somali woman and trust that she's hearing something, a song, that I can't. Sometimes I have to trust that I have to sit with someone from our LGBT community. And listen to how they're connecting to Grandmother Turtle and the songs that they might be hearing. You see, Grandmother Turtle, Turtle Island, we as Native people, we kind of have always known this. That Mother Earth, she provides for all who stand upon her. Turtle Island, if you're sick, your skin color, your country of origin, whatever comes before the hyphen American in your name, does not matter to Grandmother Turtle. If you're sick, she'll provide medicine. If you're weary, she'll provide shelter. If you're thirsty, she'll provide water. So then, what are we to do in situations that we have recently seen last year at Standing Rock, as we had people from the land standing up and saying, "This is our sacred land. Keep your dirty pipeline out of it." Were they American? Yes. And then when they are opposed by the Morton County Sheriff and sheriff's deputies from all across the country, when they are opposed by privately hired security forces to intimidate, when they have dogs unleashed on them, high-pressure water hoses, all of these tactics, when all of these happen, all in the name of corporate greed, are those American? Some would say yes. Recently in Charlottesville, as I was watching live stream footage of a gathering of some of my beloved colleagues in the clergy community and interfaith clergy, gathered in a church in Charlottesville, standing in solidarity with each other and knowing that marching in their direction, because I was seeing it on other channels, marching in their direction were Nazis and unhooded Klan members, white supremacists carrying torches. Carrying torches. Why? Why? Because clergy people want to sing. I remember watching the footage from inside that chapel as I watched a light grow outside of the windows. It would have been beautiful had I not known what it was, that it was white supremacists gathering with torches. To trap them. And my colleagues, what did they do? They sang louder. They sang louder. My relatives at Standing Rock, in the face of rubber bullets and attacked dogs, they gathered to pray. They gathered to pray. And with those who would espouse hate and domination, when they gathered against them, what did they do? They sang their songs louder. They offered their prayers louder. So who is an American? I don't even want to answer that question. Rather, let's go back. Not to the founding, not to our racist documents. Let's go even further back. With few exceptions in this room, all of you came from somewhere else. Most of you were assimilated into this system of whiteness. Some of you in this room had whiteness forced upon you. Some of you have not ever been given access to whiteness, but whiteness has cost everyone in this room something. To my black folks in this room, whiteness has cost you your stories. Many of you in this room, talking to my brothers and sisters of African American descent, you can trace your ancestry, you can trace your story back to about the mid-19th century, and before that, no more. Because you weren't a person prior to that. Whiteness has cost you your story. To the white people in the room, most of you have willingly given up your story. Not you personally, but somewhere along the line. It's cost you your people. Your ancestors came from a land in which you probably have no significant spiritual or narrative tie. And so there isn't really a place in which you can stand upon this earth and put your feet firmly in the soil and say, this is where I belong. But whatever circumstances got you to where you are right now, sitting in this room in 2017 in Dubuque, Iowa, firmly in Meskwaki territory, you are here now. And if you can't find your identity and you can't find your place anywhere else in the world, you should at least start to find your place here. What does that mean? It means perhaps that we don't get tripped up on whether or not we are tied into the system of American citizenship. We need to be citizens of Turtle Island. We need to be people of the land. And who is a person of the land? Is someone who will sit with a handful of tobacco in sacred space and listen to the ancient songs. It is someone who will, with humility and gift of tobacco, approach an elder from a people that are not yours, but knowing that their footprints long precede your footprints here. Sit, bring your gift to that elder and say, if I may inquire of you, I find myself through circumstances not brought about myself, but I find myself in your land, in your territory. Would you please graciously teach me how to humbly walk upon this land? We need to be people not of political identity defined by political borders. We need to be people of the land. And if I have to, if you will force me to identify who is an American, I will say this as I close. It is those who, when we find ourselves with ideologies that would challenge what we hold sacred, what we hold as beloved, when we find ourselves face to face with those who would seek to limit who belongs and seek to discriminate. It is those who, when we find ourselves face to face with hate, is an American? It is those who will look squarely in the face of hate and sing our songs louder. God bless you. Thank you.
Jim Bear has kindly agreed to take a few questions. I will ask you to signal, and Evelyn and I will bring a microphone. The room is pretty difficult to hear in, and we want it to be picked up in the recording. So just raise your hand, and we can bring a microphone to you.
And if I could just point something out to toot my own horn. I was told to be done at 8:15. This is what my notes looked like. It is a mess, okay? It's a mess. No one in this room could navigate this mess. It is now 8:12. That is professionalism, people.
And as many of you know, very rare in speakers, so much appreciated.
Question here.
Thank you for your words. I had an opportunity a few weeks ago to spend 3 days with a Ho-Chunk leader, you may know, John Greendeer,
Okay.
and walked some sacred lands in Joe Davis County right across the river. One of the things he said, as he's spoken around Wisconsin, when he was president of the Ho-Chunk, he said, without exception, I asked the audience, these were non-Indian people for the most part, tell me what you know about Indians. And he said, without exception, they talked about the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so can you just talk a little bit about how you personally have dealt with that? And he was saying, I'm standing in front of him, and I'm a Native American,
Yeah.
right? But all they can think about is the past, not
So,
present or future.
I have a story that illustrates that beautifully, if you'll allow me a little bit more storytelling time. Years ago, 6, 7 years ago, I'm speaking to a group of maybe 5th grade boys. So 5th graders are, 11 years old or so? And I'm just giving a very generic culture talk, like nothing this deep, nothing. It's all like, yeah, we do beadwork and and stuff like that. Okay. I'm giving this talk to 5th grade boys because my friend or someone, an acquaintance of mine, was the teacher of this group. And in the middle of my speaking, a hand goes up in the back of the room, young boy, and he says, "How'd you get here today?" I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, I didn't see a horse in the parking lot." Okay? And I waited. Like, I paused and I stared this kid down because I was waiting for the fact that this is a smart-ass kid who's just making some stupid comment, right? And that I can respect. That I can respect. I waited. And the smile never came to his face. This was a serious question. And I looked to the teacher, who I thought was my friend. And my friend just went, "What are you going to do?" And I thought, as I went home and I reflected on this, like what are you going to do? You're going to do some damn educating is what you're going to do. Because think about it, that young boy reached the age of 11 years old and never brought Native Americans into the 21st century, ever. He didn't bring them into the 20th century. Thank you. He's still with natives sitting back in the 19th century. Would we allow that with any other people group? If I may be so bold, I see a lot of young and not so young women in this room with incredibly loose morals because they're wearing pants, men's clothes. How dare you set foot out of the house dressed like that? Sounds ridiculous, right? Because if I was going to take women and I was going to trap them in the imagination of 19th century America, that's exactly what we're talking about. And if that young boy ever spoke to, especially any of my sisters here on the front row who are wearing pants, I shudder to think of the transaction that might transpire there. Because it's unacceptable that someone reaches 11 years of age and never brings someone into the 21st century, let alone the 20th century. And yet we see it all the time. Because natives, the American imagination for Native Americans stops at 1890. That's as far as we get. So I promise you, like I could have gotten up here in regalia with feathers and all of that, but I don't. And I intentionally don't, because, I mean, I don't know my audience. I'm just going to trust that you're all relatively decent thinking, progressive people who, at least when you think of natives, maybe has them driving cars. I don't know. So we can hope, right? But if you go to work tomorrow, sit with your colleagues, and do a thought experiment. Say, I want you to think of a Native American, just a random, generic Native American. Do this thought experiment. Then say, what do they look like? I promise they're wearing feathers. I promise they're wearing buckskin. I promise they live in a teepee. Because our imagination doesn't allow for that entrance into the 21st century. So what do we have to do? We have to seek out opportunities like this, where you hear from actual natives living in the 21st century, doing work in the 21st century. But yes, it is a huge, huge problem, because we don't get entrance into the 20th century, let alone the 21st century. So, any other questions?
I was hoping to make sort of the last comment be an invitation. I'm part of the St. Isidore Catholic Worker Farm, and we're continuing this conversation that Jim Bear Jacobs has presented tonight so powerfully. Thank you, Jim Bear, for being with us. It's incredible. Next Wednesday night at 7 p.m. at St. Isidore Catholic Worker Farm. If you're interested, see me after the conversation. And the title of the discussion is Decolonizing Together, and continuing to grapple with what the struggle as non-native folks, how we can join the struggle. So thank you.
Marcos here. Like two questions together. One is referred to how you put together the different visions of the creation of the land. When you look at the turtle, but at the same time when you go perhaps a little south, that they have other stories of creation, or even further south, and that's the other thing that I want to bring that came to my mind when you were talking about Native Americans in the 21st century. And we have a president that is a Native American. How many of you know that there is a president in the Americas that is a native? It's Evo Morales in Bolivia. Then, you know, what I'm bringing there is, shouldn't we use more often the experience of the natives also of South America that, you know, starts way from the independence time, that there were more wave on the process of independence than in North America, and that, you know, probably whose highest point is Evo Morales in Bolivia. That's...
So I'll address kind of the question there about kind of reconciling different creation narratives. And so this idea that narratives need to be reconciled is a very Western mindset. Yeah. And I suspect we're all guilty of this, right? We are schooled, whether officially or not. We're socialized into sort of Platonic dualistic logic, which states something along the lines of, so you have a creation narrative that makes one truth claim about how the earth came to be, and you have another creation narrative that makes a differing truth claim about how the creation of the earth came to be. Well, Platonic dualistic logic says that one can be right and one can be wrong, or they both can be wrong, but they both can't be right. And that's a Western mindset. And so here's how I handle it. I told the story of Grandmother Turtle, which is a story that comes through, among others, my Mohican ancestors, and I believe that. I hold that. I stand here in Meskwaki territory, and perhaps the Meskwaki people have a different creation narrative. And if I had the honor and the pleasure and privilege to hear that story, I would believe that. I would affirm that. Because, and I spoke a little bit about this in some of the classes I visited today, but we are conditioned to believe the written word, right? I mean, I'm here at a Catholic university, so like Scripture, we believe Scripture because it's written, or we give it more credibility because it's written. What is writing it down done for us? Okay? We have volumes of texts that are literally just primarily white men arguing about what the book actually says. We can fill libraries with this argument. So when we say in Genesis 2 that God breathed the breath of life into the nostrils of humanity, people actually argue about how that metaphysically took place. And what they lose is the beauty of the story. So it's a condition of our Western mindset to say that different creation stories can't exist in the same place. But they can. You can honor different creation narratives. And so I have the story of Grandmother Turtle. I honor that. I live in Dakota Territory. I live a 30-minute car ride away from the Garden of Eden, the birthplace of humanity for Dakota people. Guess what? I honor that. Is the story of Grandmother Turtle true? Yes. Is the story of Bedote, the Garden of Eden, the center of all creation, true? Yes. Is Genesis chapter 2 true? Yes. I don't have a problem with it. But then again, I've worked hard to socialize myself out of Western mindsets. It's part of decolonizing. It's part of this decolonizing work to get yourself out of this Western trap. And we don't even realize we do it. Right? I don't have anything to write. Okay. Can I do a little thing to demonstrate this, of how we're trapped into Western mindset? Okay. So we have a symbol in Indian country called the medicine wheel. And a medicine wheel simply points, among other things, but primarily it functions as a way of designating the four sacred or four cardinal directions. Very much like the compass rose on a map, on the legend of a map, right? So you picture, I want everyone in their mind to picture a map. Doesn't matter what it is, but you have the symbol in the corner that points to the directions. Everyone got it? What are the directions? North, south, east, west? Everyone agree? Anyone disagree? Okay, I disagree. You're wrong. The directions are not north, south, east, west. The directions are west, north, east, and south. Now, you're thinking, because we're conditioned also to be skilled in conflict avoidance, you're thinking, well, north, south, east, west, west, north, east, south. We said the same things, just in different order, so we're good. Kumbaya, let's hold hands. No. No. What is north, south, east, west? That is a beautiful demonstration of how we are socialized into Western linear oppositional thinking. And if you think about it, North is in a line with south, and the opposite of north is south. East is in a line with west, and the opposite of east is west. Okay. Folks, these are directions. Can they have opposites? No. West, north, east, and south is circular, harmonious mindset. It's beautiful. Okay. Now, does it matter all that much? When we're just talking about directions, probably not. But let's think about how we are conditioned in other ways. So, in several hours, we'll have sunrise. What's the opposite of sunrise? Sunset. Okay? Those of you who come from the coast, you're used to tides. You have high tide. What's the opposite of high tide? Low tide. Okay? Some of you in this room are men. What's the opposite of men? Women. Okay. Linear oppositional thinking, right? So, is sunrise and sunset, are they really opposites? Well, no. Sunrise forms part of a unit, sunset forms another part of a unit, and we call that a day, right? High tide and low tide, they're not opposites. High tide forms something, low tide forms something, and they come together and they form a tidal cycle. Male, female, men and women. Is woman actually the opposite of man? No. Absolutely not. How did we all get here? Because man was part of something, woman was part of something. They came together, they created, and we're here.